All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Beyond Checking the Box, Implementing a Pragmatic Risk Management Program. My name is Candace Smith, and I am BARR Advisory's Marketing Manager for Events and Brand Experiences. Today, joining me are BARR's own Larry Kinkaid, Manager of Cybersecurity Consulting, and Steve Ryan, Manager of Attest Services and our Healthcare Team Lead. I'll have our speakers introduce themselves in just a moment, but before I do, let me tell you a little bit about BARR Advisory. BARR is a cloud-based security and compliance solutions provider specializing in cybersecurity consulting and compliance for companies with high-value information in cloud environments like AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. A trusted advisor to some of the fastest growing cloud-based organizations around the globe, BARR simplifies compliance across multiple regulatory and customer requirements in highly regulated industries, including technology, financial services, healthcare, and government. All right. All right, so with that, Steve, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and provide some of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Candace. So as Candace alluded to, I am Steve Ryan. I am one of the attest service managers over here at BARR Advisory, and I also lead up our healthcare practice as well. I've been at BARR for almost 3 years now, and prior to BARR, I was at a regional firm named Wolf and Company for about 4 years prior to that as well. So excited to be able to talk to you all today and looking forward to it.
And I'm Larry Kinkaid, manager of the cybersecurity consulting practice here at BARR Advisory. I've been with the firm a little over 4 years. Before that, I spent 2 years at Domino's doing PCI predominantly, and then 5 years at Marathon Petroleum in the oil and gas sector. So, majority of my experience is in enterprise, but I definitely find the cloud space to be very energizing. So today we're here to kind of speak from the standpoint of an auditor versus an implementer. So we'll give you both perspectives in regards to that.
All right,
Cool.
so
Go ahead.
have you ever wondered how to transform your risk management program into a source of real value? Today, our presenters will discuss security versus compliance, explore strategies for securing cross-functional security buy-in, establishing accountability to empower effective risk management, implementing controls to continuously enhance your security posture, and overall, how this approach fosters a culture of security that spans the entire organization. With their unique perspectives, as Larry mentioned, as both an implementer and an auditor, the pair is going to demonstrate how practical, tailored security controls can effectively bridge the gap between security and compliance, emphasizing security as an ongoing journey with compliance as the destination. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please utilize the Q&A feature on Zoom to submit any questions that you have, and we will attempt to answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. Also, a recording of today's webinar will be provided after the event via email in case you missed something that you'd like to revisit or something that you want to share with a colleague. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you guys.
Awesome. Thank you for the fantastic introduction, Candace. So, before we really dive into, how are we going to build this pragmatic risk assessment, let's set some ground rules here that at times really shoots ourselves in the foot before we get this risk assessment off the ground, right? So, just some general ground rules. I think we can all agree, right? Security does not equal compliance, and vice versa. Compliance does not equal security. However, both of them together, both compliance and security together, does equal trust for your key stakeholders there. So let's break this down a little bit. Why do I say security does not equal compliance? Well, security without compliance, frankly, is just chaos, right? It turns into we are going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and there's no guiding beacon or anything out there. This quickly turns into, oh, here comes the CISO, he's walking into the room. Now, what ridiculous thing is he going to implement or is she going to implement there? And on the other side, one that's much more clear is compliance is not equal security. So we've all seen those SOC 2 reports or other types of compliance reports out there where it's, okay, this is a great piece of paper, but this does not tell me anything about the security of the environment, right? It doesn't really provide that picture. So really, you can be compliant with one of those frameworks out there, but you're not really all that secure, right? That's why it's so important, especially from the auditor side, that we have both of these. We have a guide and beacon, and we also have that security that's in place to make sure that we're providing as much trust as possible to our key stakeholders. And that's what as an auditor, I want you to have for your clients there as well. Larry, what are your thoughts on that from the implementer's approach?
I think it's pretty comprehensive. I always like to think of compliance as the language to boast or brag about your security program in a way, because now you're using a common language. I say I'm following a specific framework. You have an idea of the things that I'm following. So that's I think it's where the trust element really comes into play. And then I've been part of plenty of organizations where, or I've been, I guess, exposed to plenty of organizations that have compliance as a shadow box. If you're checking boxes, you're not really actually implementing real true security. And then if you're just, doing a MBM or managed by a magazine is one that I've heard today. Steve, as we were talking about earlier, you're not really having any kind of true rhyme or reason as to what you're going for within your security program. So compliance adds direction to security as well.
Excellent.
All right, so why are we doing risk assessments? Spoiler alert, it's typically compliance driven. And that's the reason why it feels like it's checking in the box is because you're typically thinking about the deliverable at the end of the day. All right, why are we doing, SOC, ISO, high trust, PCI? All right, we need a risk management policy, risk assessment procedure, risk register, maybe some risk treatment tickets and some documentation to support that. All these artifacts handed to an auditor. All right, I mean, it looks like you're doing what you say you're doing. There isn't really much, I guess, behind it besides you're just doing the needful in regards to having the documentation and all the artifacts that you need to be able to do that. But if you kind of take a step back here, I mean, ISO predominantly that is driven by the risk program. SOC 2, there's risk that's a part of it because it is kind of rather vague. But the idea is that, hey, if we implement a risk program, this is where we can be more I guess purposeful based on I guess the industry that we operate in. Plus, you got to throw fraud in there too because it's the accountants. But I don't know, Steve, what are your thoughts on why we do risk assessments?
Yeah, definitely. So again, Larry, you called it out right? The framework says we have to. As an auditor, right? We've seen all these frameworks out there. Every one of them just about says do a risk assessment. For the most part, though, a lot of those frameworks say it just as that. They leave it that broad. And that's where the auditor wants to come in and say, well, all right, great, you did a risk assessment. Did you actually account for risks that are relevant to your organization? Are you looking at, as part of your risk assessment, volcanic eruptions up in the Northeast, right? Okay, cool, you did a risk assessment, but you're implementing controls that make no sense. Um, Again, these risk assessments are going to drive your compliance to these various frameworks from my standpoint, right? Especially in the SOC world, that's how you develop your controls. From high trust language, again, high trust is a risk-based framework there, and it's going to tell you what controls to implement. But unless you're constantly evolving with that, you're quickly going to be behind or become behind on that high trust framework. Same thing with ISO, PCI, about the same tune there. So really at the end of the day, we're in alignment, Larry. It's, you got to do a risk assessment because compliance is telling you to. But what's that meat behind that risk assessment? And why are you truly doing that so that you can provide that continuous trust to your customers and keeping in mind that you really looked at all foreseeable risks out there and found ways to implement controls that are going to mitigate those risks. Again, depending upon what those risks are there. Awesome. So how, again, do we want to take a step back and really start to think about this risk assessment process? Cross-functional security buy-in is by far the starting point. It is the most important piece of this. If you are doing this and you are just the IT individual at your company, and all of a sudden you're doing this risk assessment, and then you say, hey, we did it, auditor, here you go. Now the marketing team has no idea why they're doing certain controls. Finance has no idea. Maybe even some of your own team members on the engineering team or security team have no idea why we're doing controls outside of that factor of, hey, the IT team did it, we're done. We got a checkbox in our audit. We're in a great spot. We're winning. So how do we do this? We want to establish a security committee, and that security committee should really be built up upon all key decision makers in the organization. Again, that should include obviously your GRC team, of course, that goes without saying, but also throw in your IT team, your marketing team, your finance team, legal, HR, everybody that has a role in that, because we've all heard the cliche before, security is everybody's responsibility. So why aren't we actually doing that when we actually start to create a risk assessment? What this is going to do is really, as those four bullet points call out, it's going to allow you to look at risk assessment or risk as, that wide-rounded approach, right? We're not just looking at it from the lens of an IT individual or a, security individual. We're maybe posing that risk as one of those individuals, but now legal saying, hey, have you thought about this? Or HR saying, have you thought about this? It's going to allow for enhanced decision making. You're no longer just that IT individual making this risk assessment, same with you XYZ. Okay, now I got to go to legal. Now I got to go to marketing. Now I got to go to HR. They're all in there making those decisions with you. And you're having those, again, going to the third bullet point, really great communications from the get-go so that everybody already feels bought into it. So that when you roll controls, it's not, why is this person doing this again? Why is the CISO coming in and telling me to do X, Y, Z? Didn't they just do an update last week? What's going on? And then most importantly, we want to make sure we align with business objectives. We don't want to start talking about risk, as I alluded to earlier, right? That just make no sense, or are just going to hinder our growth. Again, kind of from an auditor perspective, if you don't have that security committee, you're already behind the eight ball a little bit, in my opinion, because you're really doing that risk assessment from a really siloed approach. Larry, I think we've talked quite a bit about cross-functional security buy-in, but I'd love to for your any additional thoughts on your end there around it.
Yeah, I love what you said about the GRC element. As typically, I guess what you'd expect is that GRC just kind of pools all the risks together and kind of works in a vacuum and it's like, well, here's the risk, here's the treatment, here's the assignment, and it's not really bringing like that true buy-in or that cross-functional element that we're looking for. The risk assessment shouldn't be seen so much as just like, okay, it's the risk register. It should be a mechanism to have these kinds of conversations. So then that way you understand the context of the organization. As we mentioned before, when the CISO enters the room, you're like, okay, what do I have to do now? Oh, they brought donuts. They're trying to butter me up for something. Been a part of those organization or those cultures as well. But truly, the way to kind of use the risk assessment process is to show that, hey, we're actually trying to understand what our business objectives are, what the cost is, what the benefit of treating this risk is or not treating this risk is. So then that way we can actually, work with the business as opposed to being the Department of No, as what is I guess commonly referred to as in IT. All right, establishing accountability. Something I love to say with my clients. So if anyone on the call, I apologize in advance. But if everyone's accountable, no one's accountable. So that's why establishing that committee is so important. You have the roles and responsibilities of all the decision makers over all of the, I guess, the silos of responsibility within the organization, working together in order to understand and approach risk in a way that makes sense for the enterprise. There's someone that's responsible for it, your executive sponsor, typically your CISO or your acting CISO. But then you're going to have, your legal. You'll have your salespeople in there as well because they have a vested interest in the maturity of your security program. Hopefully, using security as enablement tool. You have HR because there's tons of HR controls that are going to be involved within a proper security program. Engineering, software development, et cetera, and really pulling in anyone else in there. I don't know if I mentioned legal, but I actually have another webinar next week where we talk through why having that relationship with legal and the security team is one of those paramount relationships within any organization. But anyways, so that's why it's all defined within that charter, the clear roles and responsibilities. And then the tool is this risk assessment process. Now, while thinking about it, and I think we touch on it a little bit later, so I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself, but the risk assessment should be seen as an annual reconcilement and kind of like um, I guess just a, an event of sorts where you're sitting down and you're truly just thinking about your risks to the organization and reviewing old risks that you may have accepted before. But risk should truly be something that you address throughout the year.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Larry, and I can't believe you just threw a shameless plug into this webinar for your next webinar, but we'll get past that one. But going back to accountability, I'm an auditor, right? That accountability is my favorite word. That's why I am an auditor. But again, it's so important, especially with building up a risk assessment and then in turn building out risk treatment plans. Because to Larry's point, right, if everybody's accountable, no one's accountable. So now I come in, the big bad scary auditor comes in, and it's saying, great, you did a risk assessment. What are your controls? How are you mitigating these? And everybody points a finger at, hey, I thought GRC was doing that. Oh, no, we said you were going to do that, right? And then I fail you because that's my favorite thing to do as your auditor, right? No, I'm just kidding. As hopefully some of my clients on here know, that's the last thing that we want. And that's why it is so important to partner with an auditor that is going to build up that partnership and that relationship to help drive that accountability and say, hey, you have a great risk treatment plan, but who's doing this? Okay, well, how are they, periodically checking in? How are you, I'm getting ahead of myself as well here, but how are you checking in to make sure you're meeting those risk treatments as you go down the line and you're building upon and continuously improving here? So accountability, again, as an auditor, is by far the most important piece to me. But again, just because I want to nail it into everyone's heads, without, if everyone's accountable, no one's accountable. And that's my favorite line now, Larry. So thank you for putting that in my head.
I would be lying if that was the first time I've ever said it, and will definitely be the last. But and I think an important thing with the accountability aspect, though, I think when I guess there's a negative connotation with that. If you're accountable to it and it fails, then it's your fault, and that's the heading the road. But I think it truly needs to be looked at more into this standpoint of like there's the bystander effect, and if you don't have accountability, then people point fingers like, oh, I thought you were gonna do CPR, call the police, right? Like no, the accountability says, okay, this named individual is responsible for it. They may not be solely responsible for it from the sense of like actual the execution, but when it comes down to it, this person is advocating and pushing forward the risk treatment and ensuring that the right people are aware of their I guess their specific responsibilities as well. So accountability isn't necessarily a bad thing in this case, as it may be seen.
Yeah, I love that. And what a perfect segue into our next topic here, if my slides want to work. There we go. Scorecards. These are going to go hand in hand with that accountability. And to Larry's point as well, right? If you fail something and you are the one that's accountable, that's not a bad thing. And why I say that is these scorecards, they're meant to constantly push continuous improvement, and you're not going to hit these at first. You want to set realistic scorecards so that they're attainable. Certainly, they want to be smart objectives, if you would, but you don't want to make them so easy that you're just constantly patting yourself on the back saying, I'm the best, look at me, look at me. And then, all of a sudden, next week a breach happens and it's, well, I hit my scorecards. That doesn't help anybody at all. So something that's really, really important is taking those risk treatments, outlining some continuous metrics to constantly look at and measure those risk treatment and or controls on a periodic basis, right? Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly, maybe it's quarterly, so that then you can continue to push you and your team for that continuous improvement. And then again, when the big bad scary auditor comes in and they start to ask questions about, hey, it looks like you're a little bit behind on security and awareness training. It's, yeah, you know what? Our scorecard was 90%, we're at 85%. Here's our action plan, here's our root cause. And then you did all the hard work for me, and now I love you because that is what I had to do, right? So again, having these scorecards are meant to, kind of gauge where you're at, but they shouldn't be the easiest things in the world so that you're constantly patting yourself on the back, but rather there's something to continuously improve yourself. And with that, as part of your annual risk assessment review, hint, hint, it shouldn't just be annual, but we'll get into that in a minute. We're going to constantly look at those risk or those scorecards. We're going to constantly say, hey, all right, we've hit this 6 out of the last 6 months. Can we be better? Why aren't we at 100% security and awareness training? So again, as the auditor, it's going to tell a story that I'm already going to ask you about before I have to ask that question. Larry, from an implementer's standpoint, what are your thoughts on scorecards? I have a feeling that's one of your favorite words as an implementer, but talk me through that one.
Well, I think as IT professionals, zeros and ones, binary, green, red, yellow, like we want to measure things. That's where the scorecard really comes into play. But I love that you said that it's a mechanism of continuous improvement, process improvement opportunities. All compliance frameworks have this language in there because, like, if we take a step back, and I'm sure everybody knows, but I'm just going to say it out loud. If you're ISO certified, doesn't mean you're secure. If you have a SOC 2 Type 2 report, it doesn't mean you're secure. These are all ways of just demonstrating that you have the proper functions in place, the proper reporting lines, the proper documentation. This is like you have the proper foundation, but you still got to hang the drywall. or else or get the proper person to put the window panes on, or else you're going to have leaks. But yeah, the spirit of this remains the same in the spirit of process improvement, and it's not so much about the failures or the successes or the numbers behind it as much as it is the dialogue. I really, really stress that it's talking about these things and understanding, what actually matters, where the actual risks lie, why are we doing what we're doing and the way we say we're doing it. And I think that these things, including not just the risk assessment itself, but this scorecard that we talk about as well, that's where these conversations are supposed to be produced. In addition to this, these are some of the basic ones that we come armed with any of the engagements we go to. But I'll be the first to tell you, I go to ChatGPT, I go to Gemini. I use them, not putting sensitive information, of course, into them, but I use them as sounding boards all the time to be like, what are some metrics that I could, put around this specific tool or that tool, or what are things that I could do over here? And I use it, I mess around with the prompts and try to get it to a point where I use it as an idea generator more than anything. So I encourage everybody to use it in such a way. All right. Implementing effective controls. So, I mean, just as we said before, this check the box is a compliance driven thing. The shadow boxes I've talked about before. It's not a hard thing to do. But at the end of the day, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're treating the risk assessment in such a way because you're not getting value out of the risk assessment process, which is the way that the space and the purpose of it is where you're truly supposed to be able to identify and have the proper discussions around risk and around proper controls, investments, and what have you. I use the example of that's probably still actually relevant today, is we would do a PCI program in which we'd have Linux within the infrastructure. And antivirus and Linux usually don't mix well together. I've yet to see very, very truly effective antivirus that doesn't like affect performance or other kinds of elements to it. But as we all know, Linux isn't susceptible to viruses, right? So we would have to sign a waiver, and we'd accept the risk. We'd say, okay, let's just, let bygones be bygones, rely on access control, and ensure there's other mitigating factors to it. But the idea behind that is then, okay, we accept it in, 2015. Let's move to the next year. Is it still the same way? Like, are there more effective ways to treat this risk? Are there more, I guess, performance less hindering ways to do this as well? Usually it's a cost thing, of course, right? Like, I guess a better example would be DLP today. DLP is becoming more and more cost, I guess, cost. People, cost friendly for startups and small to medium sized businesses. So, like DLP is a constant question: is it the right time? Do we have other mitigating controls? Are we leveraging the native functionality within our workspace or our M365? That's where the risk assessment can really shine, though, is where you document these things. You have the decisions, that there's somebody that owns it, and we're going to revisit these conversations every year until we get to a point where, okay, we can actually treat this, or until the risk is no longer there. I can't see that happening with DLP specifically. And then, in the spirit of that, there's the risk assessment that occurs annually, but risk treatment should be something that you're reviewing weekly, monthly, at least more often than annually, just because those are the things that need to have some kind of momentum. And more often than not, I see, oh, we got to the risk assessment. Here's this treatment plan. We never actually addressed it. So the risk treatments, you don't necessarily have to do a risk assessment every month or more frequently than annually. The risk assessment, again, is more of the annual gathering of sorts, a Thanksgiving in which you talk about what you're thankful for and what risks you want to actually treat. So, anyways, what's the auditor's perspective there, Steve?
I don't know. That's a perfect way to describe it, though, with the, hey, it's Thanksgiving dinner. Let's talk about risk. I'm going to bring that one to family dinner and see how that goes.
It's on the
Uh,
mind.
but yeah, from the auditor perspective, and I think the sub bullet there underneath the first one, if you view a risk assessment as check the box, your security is check the box, is, from my perspective as an auditor, so on par, right? If you do a risk assessment and you say, hey, I did a risk assessment, and then you just implement some controls here and there, call it a day, I'm going to come in and say, well, who cares? I don't care that you did a risk assessment. This is irrelevant. And frankly, you wasted everybody's time on this one. So, really, those risk assessments drive the security of the organization. And why we say that is because if you don't know what your risks are, how do you know what you have to protect yourself from? Right? Maybe you have a ton of environmental risk that, PCI only cares about your payment card risks. And yeah, you're compliant with PCI, but if a tsunami comes through, your business is going under. So great, you're PCI compliant, but your business is gone, right? As a very extreme example. So really, again, if you don't look at your full risk and threat landscape, you don't know where your vulnerabilities are going to be. And that's not to say that, you're going to go through, you're going to make a 7,000 row Excel spreadsheet because you're going to account for every single possible risk out there, including an alien invasion, and you have controls in place for that. Again, you want to be realistic. You want to keep in mind, you want to prioritize those risks of, hey, these are more likely to happen. These are really low likelihood to happen, but if they happen, they're high impact. And now I really need to have some safety controls in place. Um, so again, I can't stress enough that risk assessment is just the key driver for an auditor to come in and say, hey, show me your environment, and that tells a story for me. Larry, oh, go ahead, Larry.
Oh, no, you're good. You're good. You mentioned PCI, which I thought was funny because the element of that I always thought was really interesting is that PCI, it is only about the confidentiality. Like that's all they care about is protecting the pan, making sure that those don't get compromised. I mean, credit card breaches are obviously the risk that they're looking to treat, but availability isn't considered. I mean, as a business, you want to make sure that your credit card systems are available. Whether it's e-com, card not present, or even card present transactions, because otherwise, now you got to go to cash or you got to go to those the swiper things, and that adds another element of complexity. I can't even tell you what those things are called, but I did see them during my PCI days. So don't see them as much anymore because I guess things are more available. But anyways, yeah. But those are the spirit of that still stands. That availability of your credit card systems is something that would be out of scope of PCI, but would obviously still be a risk that you're concerned about it as a business objective.
Yeah, and not for nothing, you start to bring in cash and the swipey things, I believe is a technical term for them. And you're looking at new risk assessments you got to start doing. So, not for nothing, do a good risk assessment first, capture as many risks as you can, and now you're not doing all those mega risk assessments all over again. But to counter that point, ongoing risk assessments and implementing controls that evolve with the threat landscape. I won't lie to you, a lot of the frameworks that we audit against, you know, they get updated every 5 years, 3 years. HIPAA, was created 28 years ago, and you have some policies in place. That does not account for a cloud environment. It does not account for the new zero day that's going to come out tomorrow, right? It is so, so important to look at your landscape, analyze risks as you see them, and really start to think about, hey, are we protected from this? Are we protected from this? Not for nothing, and I have to make this plug because I am the high trust guy, healthcare guy. High trust does, update their framework quarterly. So that's probably the best framework out there in that regard. But again, a hacker's not going to wait for the next quarter to say, all right, I'm ready to go now. They're going to kind of constantly evolve with that. So really, again, it's doing it once, that big, huge Thanksgiving dinner throughout the year, constantly check in with that family, and then come back around for Thanksgiving dinner the following year, and then boom, recircle, figure out some new accountability and go from there. And Larry, now I'm not getting hungry talking about Thanksgiving so often here.
And it's getting to be dinner time on the East Coast.
Fantastic. All right. So all this is great, building a great risk assessment. You're having buy-in cross-functionally across the board. You have some scorecards in place. You have great risk treatment. You're constantly evolving with the new threats. But now all of a sudden your culture is, nope, I don't want security. Security is a hinder to me. And now all of a sudden your new intern comes in, they click the phishing link, and everything he did is gone. Right? So it is so, so important to not only build up this risk assessment framework, but use that to change your culture. We live, we're getting better, but we live in such a world or an industry really of a culture of no, I don't want to change. No, your new security control is going to make my job harder. That's all you want to do, right? Again, going back to the CISO example, that person comes back into the room. Now what? Great. Now I'm going to be behind on work again. It is so, so important to change that culture from a culture of no to a culture of maybe. And keep in mind, I say maybe because if we turn you guys into yes men, that doesn't help anybody either, right? Allow for those questions to occur. Allow for that constant evolution and a little bit of pushback even as you go through it. Before I get into that one, Larry, I'd love to have your mindset of the culture of no versus culture of maybe.
You know, I've been in organizations where I go into the room and it's like, he's here. He's gonna make me do something that I don't want to do, or he's gonna ask me questions that I don't want to answer. So I mean, not just because for my own mental health and because I want to be useful, but just as much about you want security to be part of the conversation and to kind of like, swing things back around. I mean, that's what the risk assessment is supposed to do. It takes your business and your IT security and lets them have dialogue around these things and then coming up with ways where they feel as much involved with security as the security feels involved with the business. There's the ability to then celebrate in the success of the business. I always tell that to my clients. I want to celebrate in your success just as much as I want to celebrate getting a SOC 2 Type 2 report that's unqualified or doing getting high trust certification. So I think it's like whether it's a client that hits a huge milestone with their revenue, gets acquired. Those are all things that I feel like I can celebrate in because I've had the dialogue and I understand the risks of the business because I've pulled them into these conversations and then documented not only just risks that I perceive as an IT security professional, but ones that they also care about as well.
I love that. And I think you hit bullet point number two kind of dead on there. Avoiding fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It starts with that dialogue, that constant communication. I joke, I'm your big bad scary auditor. Again, I know I have one client on here that has heard me say that about 55 times, and they chuckle every time, and I'm sure I was getting old at this point. Um, but really, that's not what I am here for as your auditor. That's certainly not what Larry's here for as your implementer, right? We want to have this full culture of we're here to help. Your auditor's here to build you up. I'm not a financial auditor. There's a reason I'm in IT, right? I'm not bound to the same rules per se, right? And it really starts with creating that or allowing that open dialogue at your organization, which then goes into that third bullet point, enabling and empowering the business, right? At the end of the day, we're quickly evolving into a security and compliance allows for you to make more money. That's why we're all here. That's why we're all starting our organizations or at our organizations. We want to make a lot of money and retire on a beach someday. But really, this industry is going quickly into a world of, oh, you don't have your SOC 2, you don't have your high trust, you don't have XYZ. I don't want to work with you. Or, hey, you're not going to answer my 15,000 row security questionnaire. I'm not working with you. Larry, I see you smiling because I know you know those all too well. But again, security and that security and compliance and equaling that trust just enables you to enable and empower your business without even having to think about it. Um, I want to tell one story, Larry, then I'll throw it over to you for kind of final thoughts on this culture. Um, but I have one client that they created this Star Wars task force that they go around and they give out baby Yodas to someone who reported the most phishing events, um, you know, reported XYZ. And it just creates this culture of we're all in this together and turns it into a game, as weird as it is to say. But because of that, now all of a sudden you're getting 0% on your phishing and awareness training. And it's not for lack of trying; it's because you built that culture up. Again, something I love calling out there. But Larry, love your additional thoughts here as well.
Yeah. I mean, security is just as much about the data, I guess, your customers, as much as it is about other stakeholders that are involved as well. I mean, it's the employees because the longevity of the business, is their job security. It's also because you're maintaining sensitive information about them for payroll and their W-2s. There's, board of directors, shareholders, whether public or private, VCs, cyber liability insurance, you name it. Everybody has a vested interest in the organization and the success of it. And that's what we're trying to manage here when we talk about risk and in this kind of, I guess, foo-foo kind of a way. But that's the way that we've chosen, I guess, as a security profession to discuss these concepts. But and again, that's where we are able to talk about them and document them. And that's, I guess, it's not the what, it's the how, and the how you're doing the risk assessment and the purpose and the things that are going around it. Then you get the deliverable. I guess don't think with the end in mind like a covey. You want to think about everything around it first. So and in doing so, you're not using a cannon and a mosquito. It's what I commonly say. It's like, hey, listen, that's I'm not here to mess with your culture, your magic as a consultant. I'm here to treat the risk in such a way that enables you to continue to do business, but also treats the risk in a way that it's acceptable.
I think that's perfectly said and a good way to close us out here with that quote. Again, I love that one. You can tell it to me so many different times, and I get a kick out of it each time, Larry. But yeah, I think that's just about everything that we had here. Candace, I'll throw it back over to you to close us out.
Yeah. All right, so thank you, Larry and Steve, for this comprehensive and forward-thinking presentation. I'd like to take the last few minutes here of this call and go over any questions that we've seen come in and do a call for questions. We have one in the queue, so now would be a great time to submit any additional questions. And you can do that through Q&A. You can drop it in chat. If you want to come off mute, just raise your hand. I'll take you off mute. You can ask your question live. And so with that, I will see. We've got a question from Michelle. How do you stay up to date and in the know with the current threat landscape?
So it's a good question because I believe this is something that we ask within ISO and other frameworks as well, because it's it's kind of worded funny in a way that like how professional organizations and memberships and things like that. How do you stay in the know? And I think the easiest way to demonstrate that is signing up for CISA or some other newsletters. But truthfully, I use Google News, so I have mine curated in such a way that it's all the security information and everything that I'm interested in. And because it knows me better than I know myself, I'm able to click and read things and do things, and then it'll pop things up as well. So my Google News is specifically curated. I definitely have my emails in a way that I'm doing that. But the other nice thing about being a part of a professional services firm that has an attestation is I have a plethora of resources, Steve included, that I can always bounce things off of to understand, okay, why are we doing things this way? Why, what's going on with this? When should I expect the next update there? And high trust updating quarterly is a good example. That's not something I would have known otherwise, unless I had the attestation arm to bounce those questions off of. So I use my network and my resources, and I guess I'm also on LinkedIn quite a bit as well. I'm a little bit of a lurker. I'd like to definitely get more involved and more active, do some more thought leadership because I think it's fun. But social media is a scary place, isn't it, Steve?
Terrifying. Gives me nightmares every day. No, but similarly, I leverage LinkedIn a lot. I'm a member of a number of just community groups, information security groups, and happy to share that list out after the call if you want to send me an email my way. But really, on the outside of LinkedIn, there are so many valuable resources out there. ISACA has a number of great resources. CSA has a number of them. Frankly, I think if you just search what's the latest threat, um, you're going to get a list of 17,000 different people all coming out with it. So it's just taking that time, taking that 15 minutes during a coffee break and just focusing in on it. Um, Not for
Mm.
nothing, I also get pestered by Larry's emails every so often, company wide. So that's always
Oh
great
yeah.
as well. So it goes both ways, Larry, that's for sure.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned ISACA, CSA. So I think it's important to mention though too, not every chapter is going to be made equal, right? So I mean, depending on your area, definitely look in to see which of your related organizations is active and supportive. So I do my ISACA here. I do ISC squared, CSA, like we said before. Those are all really useful. I guess it's not a plug for me, but GERCON, I'm in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm doing that tomorrow. That's a hacker conference. I'm very much a student there. I'm learning from these individuals who refer to themselves as hackers, and it's a good time. They definitely are a really solid community of folks, and there's a lot of these kinds of organizations throughout as well. So conferences, local or national, besides DEF CON. Yeah, though that's definitely like the best way to get this kind of information. And not only that, but just increase your network.
Yeah. And I'll close it out, just listen. You don't have to have all the answers. You can just sit back and listen, as Larry calls himself, just lurk in the darkness, right? Ingest that information and just think about it. Hey, does that apply to my organization? No? Okay, great. Yeah, hey, that actually might. Let me go talk to my committee here, see what their
Yeah.
thoughts are on that. And again, another shameless plug for you, Larry. You are on fire today with these.
It's on the front of the lobe right now. And I think it's very, very very important to be humble and mention that, like, in this industry especially, mile wide and inch deep. I mean, nobody knows everything, so it's definitely leaning on other people any chance you get. So see, that's why I like working with you.
I love it.
Apparently, I'm moving backwards, but that's okay because I had a question of my own that I thought I would bring up.
Mhm.
And when we talked about the scorecard tool here, you mentioned that these are some typical ones that you come in with. And I'm curious why these ones, and in general with a scorecard tool, how frequently um, are you meeting? Because I see that you have the frequency of when you're reporting on these, but as a security committee, how frequently are you meeting to review your scorecard?
So
Yeah,
for me
but
as an implementer, like my security in a box approach, by the way, I take an 80/20, so I've got like kind of my desired like implementation within every organization that I go into. But I always flex 20% of it to kind of meet the needs and the culture and really just kind of the appetite of whoever I'm with. But in short, we meet weekly or bi-weekly as a security committee. But these metrics are typically reviewed on a quarterly basis. Um, but so that's my general approach. But again, just based on, the mileage will vary. No, no, we want to review these monthly. Let's do it monthly then. Whatever my security committee, I want them to have buy-in and a stake in how I do things. And if that's what, the consensus is within the what's going on, and then I'm willing to meet whatever makes sense. But as long as we're doing it, I'm happy.
yeah, and my take on that is these are very much templates. Every single organization is going to be very, very unique on what makes sense to them. You could scrap all, what are they, six of these and say, nope, those are stupid, Steve. Those are a waste of my time, right? Or we can build upon these and have another 20 of them on top of that, right? The biggest thing, tell me, or yeah, let me know if you heard this one before, risk-based approach, right? How often should you be meeting to talk about it? Are we talking about incident SLAs or vulnerability SLAs where you have a ton of criticals and we need to resolve those within or address them within 24 hours, right? Maybe you're gonna meet a little bit more frequently, versus, percent of IT budget allocated towards cybersecurity. We have quarterly on here. That might even just be annually with some quarterly check-ins. Again, it really depends organization to organization and what makes the most sense. And hint, hint, another driver to that is going to be your risk assessment.
There you go. And one thing that I like to stress, because I think I get caught in the, spinning my wheels in the trap of perfection, but perfection prevents progress. Get something out there. Don't be worried about failing the baseline. Don't be worried about the I guess the other side of it. Like just get something out there and then iterate from there. Fail fast, as I think my developers like to talk through.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any other questions lingering. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you guys for taking the time to attend and to our experts for sharing your years of experience and insight and being transparent in this conversation. We hope you found this information valuable and that you got all of your questions answered. But if you did not, please feel free to reach out to Larry or Steve directly. Their LinkedIn and emails were on the previous slide. And please watch your inbox for the email with recording this webinar. And we hope you have a great and wonderful rest of the day. Thank you guys for joining.
Thanks, Candace.
Thank you, everyone.